As a kid walking into anywhere that had arcade machines, there was always one game that I looked out for. In fact, quite often I would hear it long before I saw it, and this was a game that was everywhere. The late 80s and early 90s were the absolute peak of Turtles' popularity. The cartoon had debuted in 1987, the toys were everywhere, and the movie had appeared in cinemas in 1990. So whenever myself and my friends got the chance, or spare change, to play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it took precedence over everything else. The graphics were bright and large, essentially looking like the cartoon to our young eyes. All the characters we loved were there, and we got to jump, fight and kick our way through them all. Perhaps best of all, it had the theme song, a siren's call, begging us to put whatever money we had into it. And this was a game that demanded your money. I don't recall ever getting past the third or perhaps fourth stage before running out of change. In this time of emulators and the 360 Xbox Live port, that's not really an issue anymore, but it does allow us to shine a light on what in hindsight is a very cynical and unbalanced game. Like many of its contemporaries in the brawler genre, especially Konami's other licensed titles such as The Simpsons and X-Men, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was brutally hard, while perfectly tuned to take just one more coin from your pocket. Each level would start off simply enough, giving you some space to breathe for a moment before unleashing the first of many waves of enemies on you. One-on-one, these enemies are simple and relatively unthreatening, provided you pay attention, but the game quickly starts throwing groups at you, expecting you to carefully manage their positions to give you enough space to attack, and then move out of harm's way. This isn't too much of an issue on the first or even second stages, where you're still facing mostly standard Foot Clan members, but by the time the third level begins, you're regularly having to deal not only with normal melee attacks, but also ranged attacks, who can quickly become a threat. Certain enemies can grab or freeze the player in place, which is bad enough, but made worse by the fact that it's possible for the player to be released, then almost immediately re-grabbed or attacked, which can see the life bar deplete entirely in mere seconds. This is especially common in the middle to late game, where big groups of varied enemies can almost chain their attacks together to quickly kill the player. They're also quite unpredictable. You can be easily wailing on one enemy, but when you move on to another of exactly the same type and do exactly the same thing, they somehow manage to break through your attacks. This is especially annoying with some of the tougher enemies who can inflict more damage. The AI seems to have the ability to take advantage of even the tiniest window of opportunity to sneak in some damage. Ironically enough, with one or two exceptions, the boss fights are actually much fairer. Rocksteady, Bebop, Baxter Krang and of course Shredder all make appearances. Unlike the standard enemies, most of the bosses have fairly obvious patterns which can be exploited and used to efficiently take them out once learnt. It's a nice break from the fairly brutal and unpredictable behaviour of the usual enemies. Further frustrations though are added by some of the larger attacks that the player will face, which can blanket entire sections of the screen. This is most evident in the skateboard section, where Foot Clan helicopters fire explosive rounds at the ground, and you're unable to easily jump away as the blades for the helicopters also do damage. This is one of the most annoying sections of the game, especially as it's very difficult to judge exactly where in relation to the character the helicopters are. Long story short, this is a difficult game, and one where quite often death feels cheap and unavoidable. It wasn't entirely apparent to me as a child, but this is clearly a game designed to milk children and their parents for money. The ease and frequency of death, combined with the kid-friendly IP, were a surefire way to ensure that when that continue screen appears, there's going to be a quick conversation about having one more 20p coin to put in. One thing that only occurred to me while I was planning this episode is that the continue screen counts down from 20 rather than the traditional 10. The cynic in me sees this as just giving the child a bit more time to cajole that cash from their guardian. It's a disappointing set of revelations to have about a game that I remember so fondly from childhood. I don't want this to seem all doom and gloom, however. For those who played it as a kid, the ability to progress past those first couple of levels is great, if only to see what we never managed to first time around. The gameplay is fun, and the developers managed to combine the gameplay and the license utterly perfectly, something that couldn't really be said about the Simpsons game that Konami would make a few years later. Overall, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a bit of a mixed bag, representing both the best and worst of arcade games. In terms of presentation, it's absolutely flawless, but it's let down by some cynical and frustrating gameplay decisions. It's worth playing, certainly, but once your curiosity is sated, there's little to come back to. Coming up next time on Arcade Attacks, I look at a little known platform beat 'em up from Namco, the Outfoxes. Thanks for watching this episode of Arcade Attacks. Remember to like and subscribe to see more of our videos, and to come and visit us at grcade.co.uk.